Now, one of the major problems that human beings suffer from is violence. This is a human problem. You find it in every part of the world. You even find it in the animal kingdom. Biologists and people that study animals, zoologists, used to think that wars were specific to humans, that animals didn't really have wars. They fought, they were violent, but they didn't have wars. But then they discovered that there are actually animals out there, species of biological life that have wars. Ants, there are types of ants that have wars. They take slaves. So war is part of the natural order of things, violence. Now, civilization attempts to regulate violence. That's why you have laws. You even have international laws of the Muslims called it siyar. In fact, in a book called The History of Bombing, which is a history of using aerial warfare, the scholar that wrote that book said the first person to actually put down a system of international laws regarding warfare between nations was Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man, a non-Muslim scholar who said the first person to regulate or to attempt to regulate warfare was Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. But we know it was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because that's where Abu Hanifa got his ideas from. So civilization attempts to regulate violence because it knows that humans are going to become violent, but you have to do something with the violence. So how do you regulate violence? So there are laws. You have coercive laws. Every government uses violence. A policeman carries a gun. Why? Because he's ready to use it to prevent harm. So violence is used to prevent harm in a civilized environment. In an uncivilized or barbaric environment, it's used to inflict harm. And this is the difference between the civilized and the uncivilized. The civilized will resort to violence to prevent harm or to stop harm, and the barbaric will resort to violence as a means of achieving their ends. Now, when you have a domestic situation, the purpose that human beings come together cannot be reduced to one purpose. There's nothing that says, for instance, that the purpose of marriage is procreation. Even though you'll find that, I think it's a misguided statement in books on Islam, because that is not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is actually tahsin al-farj. It's to protect yourself by finding a tranquility in another person so that you don't become bestial. So it's actually a civilizing force. Marriage is part of the civilizing process. It's the way people become more human. It civilizes human beings when they enter into a marital contract. And that's why when children are brought into the world, both partners accept responsibility for those children. Now, generally, the male accepts the responsibility of maintenance. And this is why in the Quran it says, الرِّجَالْ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Men are maintainers of women. Ibn Ashur, the great Muslim scholar from Tunisia, probably, I think, the most significant scholar of the 20th century, but that's obviously debatable. Ibn Ashur, in his tafsir, says that this verse does not mean that all men take care of all women. But this is the norm. And the Quran speaks to people based on norms. There are women who take care of men, and we witness that every day. There are men who get sick and wives who will work to support their husbands. For whatever reasons, you have deadbeat dads. You have husbands that don't work and the woman goes out and works. A woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and said to the Prophet, "What do you say about a woman who supports her husband?" He said she has two rewards. The reward of maintenance and then the reward of charity, because it's not an obligation for her. So even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were women who supported their husbands. We also know that Khadija was an independent merchant. The Prophet's wife was an independent merchant. We know that about her. She actually supported The Prophet ﷺ, even though he earned his livelihood, he worked for her, but she was the one who was hiring him. So you have these situations. Now, in a domestic environment, the purpose of a domestic environment is in order for the human project to come to fruition. Now, there are many dimensions to the human project, but the single and primary dimension is the spiritual dimension according to our belief. So part of the reason for marriage is that you take a partner in order for the two of you to work towards that goal of becoming pleasing to your Lord. And that's why there are many hadiths that Allah loves marriage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves people coming together. Allah loves that families are built. Allah loves to see a man exhausted at the end of the day who's earning livelihood to support his family. The Prophet ﷺ said that the real jihad is supporting your family. He said, "Man ala waliduhu," the one who supports his parent, or waladahu, or his child, that is a jihad, struggling in the way of Allah.